rabid minds on rabid journeys. I'm a scientist, sir. I'm not a folklorist. If we can constrain ourselves to this area right here, then perhaps folklore is the only tool available to the less educated to describe the unusual phenomena, parts of which they have been able to glimpse. Yeah. Yeah, I can comment on it. If they had an encounter with it, it wouldn't be there. Believe me, if you had an encounter with the creature, you wouldn't be here talking to me. And as far as those who have seen it, they're liars. Every one of them. Right, your suggestion, which is exactly what happens when you use folklore as a basis for any kind of scientific investigation. It's all imagination. There's no hair on this creature, none whatsoever. And that's why you know that these discussions about Yeti or Bigfoot, as they call them, I mean, a creature exists here in Mississippi because here is unique. And it has no hair. It has, in fact, a skin that's almost reptilian, except that it's not. It's not scaly. It's fleshy. But the flesh has been darkened with differing models of shade, grays and blacks, sometimes even shimmering hues of blue, on slightly raised ridges. It's impossible to make out its form. I can show you an imprint.
Sure.
Yes. I took an imprint once. The creature must have fallen. And when the creature fell, some of its skin pressed into the very fine-grained clay of the stream bed. Well, there wasn't much water, and that soon left. But the imprint remained. And I was able to take that imprint. The only proof of the creature that has ever been found.
I know in your article you talk about the Peterson film, and I definitely know how you feel about it, but I just feel like I have to ask you to make a comment on it now. What are your thoughts about this film?
I have two words to say about that film. Rubbish.
That's actually one word, but take your point.
Thank you. We need not dwell on that subject any further. You came to me to learn the truth, and you asked me questions with false leading elements. Don't waste my time, young man. There's more to be done in my duty. I'm a scientist. I need no first-hand knowledge in order to describe a phenomenon that exists and that is scientifically demonstrable. You are such a poor trapeze artist. I did not say that. I did not say if they saw them, they would not be here. What I said is if they got close to them so that they could make out the outline of the creature, they would not be here.
Can you say something about I know you talk about this in your article, can you say something about the creature's environment, the evolution of the environment the creature lives in?
Simple. It's our environment. Have you ever wondered why the Appalachian Mountains are so high and ruggd, right down to the Warrior Plateau of Alabama and into the shoulder of Mississippi? And then you cross this very flat land with some hills representing erosional patterns, only to rise again in the Ouachita and Boston Mountains of Arkansas. Have you ever wondered why there is a discontinuous area between those two mountain ranges? Perhaps you have thought that perhaps there was a continuous mountain chain between those two, and that Appalachian mountain chain and the Ozark Boston Mountains represented a continuous chain of eruption and compression where continental plates were rifting apart and fusing together. Now, if that was true, you might say, well, doctor, why have we no mountains then in this part of Mississippi? We do. They're down below. For you see, here, there was a giant section of the Earth's plate that simply sank, and with it, all of the features and cracks and crenations of the faulting system that represents the Appalachians and the Ozark Mountains today. Whereas down below, in these rifts, these fissures, there continues to well up from deep in the planet mixtures of rock and minerals found nowhere else on this planet but here. I'm a scientist. Do I need to explain proof to you? I know how the scientific method works. I have made an observation. I've come up with a hypothesis. To test that hypothesis, I simply go out and I look to maps of geologic disturbances, which now becomes a theory. And unless you have the ability to refute it, I am able to say with some certainty that these creatures exist here because they feed off of a mineral mixture of foods that supports their metabolism and which they cannot get anywhere else. And that's why you won't find them in the mountains of Washington or the jungles of the Amazon. You'll find them here in the pine forests of Mississippi.
Is there, so say more about the food source. You talk about a mineral-rich environment that supports them. What else do they eat?
You know, sometimes I wonder what they're teaching in college. Well, if you've studied your history properly, and I'm not sure that you have the necessary background to properly investigate this issue, but you will find that before European colonization of this area, it was previously inhabited, of course, by Native Americans, and they managed the land. But there weren't as many of them, and they were spread out, and they were very savvy. They knew the woods, and they knew the dark things of the woods, and they knew to stay away from the traps that dark things in the woods set. You know, I don't know if you've studied enough of warfare in the colonial days, but the Native Americans rarely fought at night. No, they were smarter than we were, or at least wiser. They'd lived there for generations. I mean, hundreds of generations. And in these woods, in this part of the North American continent, they were not the only creatures living here. Now, when the colonists came here, the European colonists, and after they finished moving out or killing the Native Americans who were here, they set up lodgings in greater numbers. And if there's one thing that they didn't understand, was the experience and wisdom of the peoples who were here before they were. Those were wise peoples.
And there are more sightings of it now. What do you make of that?
It's funny that you ask the question the way you ask it, because I'm able to answer it in a way that complements the Native Americans who were here before we were, before I was. Because with their scientific knowledge, we could have protected ourselves. But I knew when I started reading more and more reports in the paper about the increase in the damage done by the wild boars, I knew what it meant. It meant that the creatures had discovered a newer food source, a more readily available food source, and they no longer needed these smaller, pig-like animals.
I could imagine this creature might feel like its territory is being threatened.
Fool. You have not studied biology. Come take my class. I teach an introductory biology class. It's a very simple matter. When you have a profusion of hares, you get a multiplication of foxes. It's very simple. This isn't a territorial encroachment thing. These creatures can handle all of the human beings that we can throw at them. Did you prepare for this interview?
I like to think I did.
Did you write down notes in a series of questions?
I did.
Did you ask yourself how these organisms reproduce?
Well, I guess I didn't know that I had to ask that question, but since you bring it up.
I don't know.
There have been reports about markings on trees. Well, I guess my assumption was that was a way of marking territory, but after having listened to you talk for all, I'm not sure that's actually entirely true.
Well, have you looked at any of them? Did you have the courtesy to go out and look before you came and wasted my time here with these silly, unbased questions? My God. If you had gone out and looked, you would have found what looks like claw marks on trees. Is that what you've been told? Is that what you've read? Yes, and that's supposedly a marking of a beast of some sort. Could be a bear, right? Could be a sloth as far as you know, and there haven't been any of those since the glaciers left. If you go closely and look at the base of the marking, a gash cut in the tree, you'll see even today blobs of sticky sap will form. And they'll continue to form as long as that tree continues to live and send up sugars from the roots and sugars from the needles down to the roots. But you already knew that because you went to school. But what you didn't do was use the mathematical capability of your mind that was imprinted by the genetic structure from your previous generations to ask the question, what are the additional markings at the very base of the claw scar? And those claw marks are a way for the creature to draw sustenance and sugars from those pine trees. Well, if you had a male cat, and if the cat was not neutered, you would notice that everywhere the cat goes, the cat turns around, backs up, and squirts several dollops of hormone-scented urine to mark the fact that that creature, the cat, is present and claims this territory as his own. Now in the woods, and if you go there, and if you get on your knees, and you move around on your hands slowly to each tree, and you smell the base of the different trees, your nostrils, which are a beautiful sensory organ, will begin to discern a pattern. That some trees have a distinct, albeit hardly noticeable, odor. That's the creature. That's what you don't know. And if you had any curiosity at all, you'd go out into that pine forest, you'd get on your hands and knees, and you'd spend an afternoon attempting to learn what I already know. And then maybe you'd come back here with some sensible questions rather than wasting my time as a high school kid trying to do a term paper.